Your hoses are tacky. This isn't how Vermont country living should look.
Carolyn Whitfield had been HOA president for 6 weeks, and she'd already decided William Carver's 4,000 tap lines were an eyesore.
They feed a national brand, and this Sugarbush is a Vermont State Heritage agricultural site. It's been operating for 6 generations.
Heritage. It looks like blue spaghetti. I've already arranged for a contractor to clean it up.
She had already called Rick Dalton, a local contractor who relied on the new HOA for work.
These lines look maintained. Are you sure they're abandoned?
I don't pay you to ask questions. Cut them, all of them.
By sunset, 4,000 lines lay in coiled heaps, sap pooling in the snow like open veins. William came at dawn to check the evaporator and found the Sugarbush silent. The lines hung severed, dripping.
130 years. Gone.
He walked to the bronze plaque his great-grandfather bolted to the trunk in 1893. The state heritage designation predated electricity in this valley.
6 generations of maple syrup, and she called it blue spaghetti.
The national brand's premier maple syrup blend came exclusively from these tap holes. That contract was now bleeding into the snow.
That syrup paid the land tax and kept the sugar shack running. Without this season, the Sugarbush might not survive.
He pulled out his phone, the screen cold against his thawing gloves.
There's a specific law protecting heritage agricultural sites, but would the state actually send someone?
He found the Vermont State Heritage Agency in his contacts, saved since the designation ceremony a decade ago.
He hesitated. What if they treated this like a neighborly squabble instead of a crime?
He pressed the green call button. The phone began to dial, each tone a small defiance. The first ring cut through the silence of the Sugarbush, echoing off the mountains. Officer Helen Morse stepped from the agency truck, green parka crisp, and surveyed the devastation.
Mr. Carver, I am Officer Morse. You reported vandalism of a heritage agricultural site?
4,000 taps, cut clean, sap freezing on the ground.
She crouched by a severed line, photographing the clean cut. Her expression hardened. Carolyn Whitfield strode into the Sugarbush, pink vest bright. She stopped short at the officer's badge.
What's this about? Those lines were abandoned and ugly. I was just restoring the view shed.
That plaque makes this a Vermont State Heritage agricultural site. Cutting lines is a felony, up to 5 years.
Felony? Nobody told me. The HOA gave me authority to remove nuisances.
I am issuing a citation for willful destruction. The state's attorney will review for criminal charges.
Carolyn's face drained of color. For the first time, her certainty looked brittle. But she straightened her shoulders. That afternoon, the phone rang in the sugar shack. The brand's CEO was on the line. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was a blade. The contract was exclusive. By nightfall, a civil complaint landed on William's doorstep. $3.4 million. At the HOA clubhouse, the news of the citation reached the board. Whispers turned to shouts.
This is a civil matter. My attorney will crush it.
She had hired a Burlington lawyer known for shredding environmental claims. His retainer was $50,000. He filed a motion to dismiss the felony citation, arguing the Sugarbush was private land, not public heritage. William sat at his kitchen table, staring at the lawsuit. The brand was not bluffing.
$3 million. That would replant every line and keep the sugar shack running for years.
But while Carolyn's lawyer built his defense, William Carver pushed open the sugar shack door and knelt by the old trunk where his great-grandfather's records were kept. William lifted the trunk's lid, releasing the scent of pipe tobacco and leather. Inside lay his great-grandfather's ledgers, survey maps, and a folded parchment he had never seen. But the parchment bore a seal. Maple Forest Reserve, 1893. Perpetual easement attached to the Sugarbush. He drove to the office of an old land-use lawyer who still used a rotary phone and kept dusty law books. The lawyer unfolded the parchment and adjusted his bifocals. Then he laughed softly. He traced a clause with a trembling finger. This easement runs with the land, in perpetuity, over 40 acres, spreading a modern survey map. He marked a boundary in red ink that swallowed the new subdivision. The easement encompassed the entirety of Carolyn's property, and every house she had built.
That changes everything. But how?
For the first time since the cutting, a cold calm settled over him. The old lawyer ran his finger down the parchment again. Then he picked up his phone and called the county recorder. The easement had been recorded in 1893 and never vacated. It was as durable as the granite under the snow. The lawyer turned to William, his old eyes bright. "You are not just a sugar maker. You are the landlord of that subdivision."
Every house, every road, every paved driveway sits on an easement that belongs to me.
Through the window, the new rooftops were visible through the trees. Carolyn's house sat dead center in the red ink.
Draft a notice of easement. Send it to her attorney. I want her to understand that she built on borrowed land.
The lawyer's fingers flew across the keyboard. He cited the Maple Forest Reserve Act and the legal definition of permanent encumbrance.
6 generations stayed silent and steady. Now the land itself would speak.
The printer hummed. 4 pages. Official seal. It demanded immediate acknowledgement and cessation of all claims. The envelope was thick and white. The lawyer slid it across the desk. "This will either settle everything or start a war." The certified envelope arrived at Carolyn Whitfield's door on a Friday morning, bearing the seal of a land use law office.
Perpetual easement. This must be some kind of desperate bluff. Tell me this is a prank. A 130-year-old document can't possibly override my deed.
Her lawyer's voice was flat. "It can, and it does. The Maple Forest Reserve easement was never extinguished. It covers your entire lot."
That means he owns the ground under my house.
Meanwhile, the National Brand's legal team moved for summary judgment. The figure was $3.4 million, due immediately. At the Vermont Department of Tourism, an official drafted a letter revoking the HOA's right to use the Vermont Country Living trademark. Carolyn stood in her silent living room, surrounded by evidence of a fight she'd already lost.
What do I do? He's going to make me a tenant on my own property.
Her lawyer's reply was grim. "You might have to negotiate, but Mr. Carver holds every card." The HOA board called an emergency session. Word of the easement and the Brand lawsuit had spread like fire through dry grass.
I did what any responsible HOA president would do, remove visual clutter to protect property values.
A man in the front row stood up. "You just cost us our trademark and a $3 million lawsuit." The vote to remove her was unanimous. Outside, a crew was already taking down the Vermont Country Living sign. The HOA's marketing rights were revoked that afternoon. William watched from the edge of the Sugarbush, the sun setting behind him. He had seen the vote. He turned away.
She thought the blue spaghetti was ugly. Now she's choking on it.
He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer.
Draw up a lease. Standard Vermont residential tenancy. Month to month. She can pay rent or vacate.
The lawyer's reply was brief. The easement gave William full right to set terms. William tucked the phone into his coat. The lease would be ready by morning. He would deliver it himself. William walked through the subdivision, the lease heavy in his pocket. The new houses stood on ground his family had owned for 130 years. He climbed the porch steps and knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet morning. Carolyn opened the door, her eyes red, her pink vest nowhere in sight. She flinched when she saw him.
What do you want now? You've already destroyed me.
William didn't answer. He simply held out the lease agreement, printed in bold. She took it reflexively.
A lease. He's gone completely mad.
The 1893 easement states this land is mine, in perpetuity. Your house sits on it. You are my tenant. 30 days to sign or vacate.
No, I'll fight this. My lawyer.
Your lawyer already advised you. Rent is $1,000, due by the 15th. I am not here to argue.
He turned and walked back into the Sugarbush. Carolyn stood in the doorway, the lease crumpling in her grip as the reversal settled on her shoulders. 3 days later, the Brand's lawyer called. Carolyn's insurance had settled. The payment covered lost production and legal fees. The felony citation was reduced to a fine and community service, on the condition that Carolyn formally acknowledged the Sugarbush's heritage status.
So now I have to publicly admit I was wrong. and pay him rent.
She sat at her kitchen table, the lease spread before her. Her pen hovered for a long moment. She signed, Carolyn Whitfield, tenant of the Carver Sugarbush.
The rent would cover the Sugarbush's taxes. The easement held. The legacy was safe.
The HOA filed its final dissolution papers. The Vermont Country Living sign was gone, replaced by a simple post reading Private Road. Carolyn watched from her window as the subdivision's name was erased. The homeowners had already formed a new, quieter association.
Season's over, but the sap will run again next spring. That's the thing about maple sugaring. It rewards patience.
And patience, William knew, was a family tradition. Spring came, and the Sugarbush healed. New blue lines stretched tree to tree, and the taps ran clear. Sap dripped into buckets with a steady rhythm. The sugar shack steamed again. William stood inside, the warm smell of boiling sap filling his lungs. Everything was as it should be. He placed the 1893 ledger and a framed photo of his great-grandfather on a shelf near the door.
6 generations. The land held, and so did we.
The bronze heritage plaque caught the late-day sun, its letters sharp against the bark. Beyond the tree line, the rooftops of the subdivision were silent. No sound but the wind and the drip of sap. Vermont's oldest sugarbush was whole again, its future as permanent as the granite beneath the snow. William turned from the plaque and walked toward the sugar shack, his silhouette framed by the steam. The sugarbush endured, as it had always done, quietly, stubbornly, and lets the feeling finish naturally. And for another generation, unchanged. Weeks later, a letter from Carolyn's bank confirmed the first rent payment had cleared. The Sugarbush's tax account was replenished.
$1,000. Exactly what the easement costs me every year. The circle was complete.
William walked the lines every morning. The new tubing glowed in the sunrise, a clean web across ancestral ground. He paused at the bronze plaque, its patina catching the light, and touched the words his great-grandfather had requested.
She called it ugly, but the blue spaghetti is still here, and she's paying for it.
In the subdivision that was no longer an HOA, the residents had planted their gardens and painted their shutters without any committee. Carolyn kept her curtains drawn, but the mailbox was labeled with the number she'd had since before the fight. Vermont's maple trees don't forget, but they also don't hold grudges, and neither did William. He returned to Sugar Shack, fed the fire, and listened to the steam. The work was the same as it had been for generations. And as the sun set behind the sugarbush, the only sound was the steady drip of sap, the same rhythm that had marked every spring since 1893. The next morning, while the sap was still cold, William opened the old trunk for the first time since the crisis ended. He wanted to put the 1893 ledger away properly. His fingers brushed a hidden pocket in the leather lining. Inside was a yellowed envelope he had missed. He unfolded the brittle paper and recognized his great-grandfather's handwriting. The ink was faded, but firm. It read, "Let the Sugarbush stand as a reserve, not for profit, but for the land itself, so that no fence, no road, no house may ever stop the sap."
He didn't just save the land for us. He saved it from us.
He folded the note and placed it beside the ledger and the photograph. The 3 pieces now told a single story. The picture of his great-grandfather looked back at him from 130 years of silence. William stepped outside. The sun was climbing, and the sap was beginning to flow again. The sugarbush was awake. In the distance, the subdivision was just rooftops. But in the sugarbush, the only history that mattered was written in maple. And that was enough. One morning in late spring, a knock came at the sugar shack door. It was a man from the subdivision holding a pie and looking uncertain. The neighbor introduced himself as Mark, the one who had spoken up at the HOA meeting. He wanted to understand the sugarbush.
Most folks around here just call it blue spaghetti. But if you want to see what it really is, come inside.
William led him to the shelf where the ledger, the photograph, and the folded letter lay. He picked up the letter. He read the great-grandfather's words aloud, slowly, so that the stranger could hear what the land meant.
He wrote that in 1893, 6 years before the first maple syrup co-op in Vermont. He knew what he was protecting.
The neighbor looked out at the sugarbush, then back at William. "I am sorry about what our HOA did. We didn't know."
You know now. That's enough. The easement will hold as long as the maples stand.
He didn't ask for anything, but Mark promised that the new community would include a clause in its rules: no cutting within 100 feet of the Sugarbush. William watched him go, then turned back to the sugar shack. The steam was rising, and there was work to do. A month later, a letter arrived with a Boston postmark. Inside was an offer from a development firm wanting to buy the easement for $2 million.
$2 million would rebuild the sugar shack and put something aside for the next generation, but the land would be gone.
He drove to the old lawyer's office again, placing the offer letter on the desk. Without a word, the lawyer read it, then leaned back. You could sell the easement and still keep the Sugarbush. You'd be a rich man, William.
I'd be selling my great-grandfather's promise. The easement wasn't written for profit. It was written for the maples.
He thanked the lawyer and drove home through the Sugarbush, the blue lines threading the trees like veins.
Carolyn wanted to cut the spaghetti. The developers want to buy it. They both miss the point. The sap doesn't care about money.
That evening, he fed the fire in the sugar shack and listened to the sap drip outside. The offer letter lay unopened on the shelf. The Sugarbush had stood through 2 centuries. 2 world wars and 100 Vermont winters. It would stand through a developer's checkbook, and William Carver would see that it stayed that way. The brand's regional manager arrived unannounced at the sugar shack one morning, carrying a briefcase and a tight smile. He laid out the numbers. The brand wanted to double production. They would fund a massive expansion into the untouched easement maples.
Those trees have stood since before my grandfather was born. He left them alone for a reason.
The manager pushed a contract across the table. 10-year term, triple the income, but it demanded every last gallon.
You are asking me to turn a heritage reserve into an industrial farm. The easement was written to protect these trees, not bleed them dry.
The manager reminded him that the brand depended on the Sugarbush, and that refusing might force them to seek another source.
I could lose the contract, and with it the income that keeps the Sugarbush alive. But if I say yes, I break the promise I just defended.
William stood and walked to the shelf that held the letter. He touched the yellowed paper without reading it.
I'll keep the contract we have. The maples in the easement stay wild. That's how it's been for 130 years.
The manager left without the signature. Outside, the sap continued to drip, steady and unhurried, as if nothing had changed. A week later, the brand's CEO called directly. No more managers. His voice was cold as the spring runoff. He said the brand would terminate every contract unless William agreed to full production within 10 days.
They're asking me to choose between my grandfather's reserve and the income that keeps this place alive.
He looked out the window at the easement maples, the ones his great-grandfather had forbidden to tap.
Then our business ends here. I won't put a single tap into those trees.
The CEO hung up. The line went dead. The Sugarbush had just lost its largest buyer. William sat down at the rough table and ran his fingers over the 1893 ledger. No panic, just a deep, worn sadness.
The taxes are due in September. Without the brand, I'll need another way. But I won't sell the easement, and I won't cut the reserve.
He opened the ledger to a page marked Expenses 1894 and saw that his great-grandfather had paid the taxes with just 17 barrels of syrup. It was a small operation then. It would be a small operation again. The Sugarbush would survive on its own terms. The first of the month brought Carolyn's rent check. Deposited without comment, the Sugarbush tax fund was secure. He sold his first small batch of syrup at a roadside stand just outside town, the same spot his father had used. People drove from 3 towns over for Carver's syrup. The heritage plaque was the first thing they saw when they pulled in. Mark became a regular, and the new community association voted to maintain the 100-foot boundary permanently. Carolyn still kept her curtains drawn, but her trash bin was wheeled to the curb every Monday morning, just like every other tenant.
She's not a threat anymore. The easement did exactly what it was written to do. It stopped the fence, the road, the house.
The plaque caught his eye as he walked the lines. The bronze had turned green at the edges, but the words were still deep.
Great-grandfather didn't just register a maple forest. He planted a seed that outlasted concrete.
That evening, the sugar shack steamed again, and from a nearby open window, the sound of a radio drifted across the snow. A farmer's report promising a cold spring. And deep in the Sugarbush, the blue spaghetti lines did their quiet work. Because the heritage wasn't just a plaque. It was the land itself. One more letter arrived that winter, this time from the Vermont State Heritage Agency. It confirmed the perpetual easement was now federally recognized.
Federal recognition meant no one could ever challenge it again. Not a developer, not an HOA, not even the state itself.
He folded the letter and placed it inside the 1893 ledger, next to his great-grandfather's note. The two documents now formed a single continuous promise. Outside, the subdivision had fully settled into its new rhythm. The 100-foot boundary was marked with simple wooden posts. William walked the perimeter on the last day of the year. The ground was frozen hard under his boots.
131 years now. The season that was lost by Carolyn's cutters is just a scar on the ledger, not a chapter.
The bronze plaque had a fresh patina of frost. He touched it briefly, then headed back to the sugar shack. The fire in the evaporator crackled softly. Sap was boiling down to amber. The whole shack smelled of caramel. William poured a small sample into a testing cup and held it to the light. The syrup was perfect. Outside, the blue lines stretched into the dusk. Each drop of sap was a small, stubborn act of endurance. The wooden posts marking the 100-foot boundary weathered into the landscape. No one questioned them. No one crossed them. William knelt at the base of a maple and tightened a new tap line. The same motion his great-grandfather had made 130 years before.
The work didn't change. The Maples didn't care about lawsuits or easements. They just wanted to be tapped and to run.
The roadside stand sold out every weekend. Small bottles, handwritten labels, a line of cars waiting on the gravel. The bronze plaque was now visible from the road. Parents read it to their children before they bought their syrup.
Maple Forest Reserve, my great-grandfather called it. Not maple business. He knew what he was doing.
Carolyn's house remained quiet across the boundary. Her rent check arrived early each month, signed with the same stiff signature. Winter released its grip slowly. The sap began to run faster, and the sugar shack ran from dawn until midnight.
17 barrels paid the taxes in 1894. We'll make more than that this year, but the principle is the same. The trees pay their own way.
And as the last snow melted, the blue spaghetti lines emerged, wet and gleaming, threading the sweet history of the Carver Sugarbush into another year. Spring deepened, and the Sugarbush hummed with life. The brook ran full, and the maples unfurled new leaves. William closed the evaporator for the season. The last barrel was sealed. The fire banked.
Another year in the books. The sap ran, the taxes are paid, and the reserve stands. That's all my great-grandfather ever asked for.
He walked to the bronze plaque and stood there for a while, just listening. No cars, no voices, only the wind in the old trees. He thought of the photograph on the shelf, the ledger, the folded note, the 3 men who had stood here before him.
We raised a family and a forest on the same ground. Can't ask for more than that.
As he turned back toward the sugar shack, the blue lines bobbed gently in the breeze. They carried the promise of another spring. Vermont's oldest Sugarbush was not just a heritage site anymore. It was a testament to what endures when a man keeps his word to the land. William Carver didn't need a sign or a lawsuit to prove his claim. The Maples did that, and they would keep doing it. Spring after spring, for as long as the sap runs, the seasons turned, and the Sugarbush remained as it had for 6 generations. Carolyn's name faded from the HOA minutes, but the Carver name stayed carved on the plaque.
The blue spaghetti is still here, ugly or not. It's the veins of this place.
He tightened the tap on a young maple, a tree his grandfather planted in the 1940s. The roadside stand sold out as always. A new generation of Vermonters learned the taste of Carver syrup.
In 1893, he wrote for the land itself, not for profit. That's the recipe.
The 100-foot boundary posts had become part of the landscape, like old fence posts, and at night when the sugar shack steamed, the maples whispered the same promise they always had. William Carver stood at the window, watching the steam rise. The work was done. The sap would run again, not because of a lawsuit or a lease, but because that was simply what the land did.